For a while now, I've been wanting to set up a reading journal, but I'm someone that has many different kinds of hobbies, and I definitely hyperfixate on one of them at a time. So I go through reading phases where I read non-stop for a month or two, and during that time I'll finish 10 plus books. But it's not a consistent hobby because for the next month or 3, I might just read one book and read it slowly. At first I thought that a reading journal would be a waste, and I would most likely end up setting it up each month and not use it. But then I figured that I don't have to be a super reader, but I can embrace being a slow reading girly and set up a reading journal that would serve my reading needs. A reading journal that spans over multiple years. Instead of having monthly setups, I can have a few general tracker pages and even some personal reading challenges, and then have a yearly section where I can record what books I read. Today's video is probably one of the longest videos that I have ever uploaded to my channel so far, so please grab yourself a cup of tea or coffee, or if it's in the evening, grab a glass of wine, maybe even a snack or two, or if you just want to put me in the background while you continue doing some chores around the house, this is your chance to do that. For my first ever reading journal, I am using this Tsuki Soft Feather Edition Traveler's Journal by Notebook Therapy. On the first page, I've added a rating system. I'm not really sure if I'll keep this system in the long term. If I do end up changing how I rate the books and the definitions of each star rating, I'll probably cover up this page and redo it. But for now, I've only added 4 different ratings. I chose to not include a 1-star rating simply because I've never actually experienced reading a book that I dislike so much that I would rate it a 1. Even the ones where I didn't finish the book, which has only happened twice. Maybe one day, if I find that book, then I'll add the 1-star to my system. The reason this journal took so long to set up and why this video ended up being so long is because I really wanted to make this book fully inspired by literature in theme, with full messy pages with art inspired by some of my favorite books and stories. For the first theme in this journal, I decided on a Harry Potter theme, but focusing on the book aspect and making sure to include a lot of book pages and tea-stained paper for an aged look. On the cover page, I've drawn a rough sketch of Hogwarts Castle on some tea-stained paper and ripped the page edges. For the journal title, I'm using an old English font that I got off of Google Images and writing it on some tea-stained paper as well. Under that, for the rest of the title, I'm using my trusty alphabet stamp set. Now, this is a page that I look forward to using in the future. This is my places I've visited page. As you can see, I'm drawing a map on some tea-stained paper. This map is very much inspired by the maps at the beginning of a lot of fantasy books. And the idea of this page is that whenever I read a book that is set in a specific place or world, I will write that name somewhere on the map, so that in the future I can look back and see what places my mind has visited, whether it be an actual place or a place set in fiction. I think this page will look very cool once it's filled in. There are already a few little landscapes that I'm drawing in, and I might end up adding some more doodles as I go. On the edge of the paper, I've used some distress ink to stain the page a bit more, and for the drawing, I'm using my Pigma Micron fine liner pens to line the land, mountains and forests, and of course my little Nessie. I want to keep the map pretty simple to make sure that there's still space for me to write the names of the places where my books are set in. I tried to add enough different kinds of terrain just in case I read a book where it's set in a desert or maybe in a forest or even on a ship. You might have guessed that my favorite genre is fantasy and high fantasy. I made sure to add some obvious folds in the map, like it's been folded and refolded many times and has worn down with use. This helps when I stick it in the journal to help fit it nicely and not just have a random fold in the middle where the book closes. Of course, it's almost not a reading journal if you don't have a drawn bookshelf. I'll be using this shelf to write down all of my physical books. I do live in Vietnam, so it can be a bit of a struggle to find English books in the local bookstores, so I usually order online. Or if I do go to a bigger city like Ho Chi Minh, then I go on a bit of a book hunt, which I love doing. I wish I was able to read Vietnamese books, but my Vietnamese is definitely not that good yet. Maybe one day. On the bookshelf, I added some knickknacks, but not too many because I'll be using this shelf over a few years and not just for this year. So I want there to be plenty of space to write. When I do eventually run out of space and I haven't finished the journal yet, by then I'll add another bookshelf. But I mostly read off of my Kindle, so I think this bookshelf will be enough. My next page is something completely new to me because I haven't yet listened to any audiobooks. I know, it's unbelievable, right? I usually listen to podcasts while I do lesson planning or marking tests or cleaning my house. So I think that I will definitely enjoy audiobooks. I think I'm gonna try out Audible. But if you have any recommendations of where I can listen to some good audiobooks, and if you have a few book recommendations, please let me know. So for the audiobook library, I drew some rectangles and added the play buttons. Under that, I drew 5 stars where I can rate the audiobooks. I can imagine that I might run out of space on these pages much faster than the bookshelf, so once I finish these, I'll draw some more on the next open page in my journal. For my first challenge page in my reading journal, I'm setting a 100 books challenge for myself. Now, like I said, this journal is for multiple years, so I know I'll definitely eventually reach 100 books, especially because I am including physical books, audiobooks, and Kindle books in this challenge. And when I reach 100, I will add my 200 books challenge later in the journal. One of the reasons that I love doing scrapbook themes in my journals is all of these different textures. For me, textures are very mentally stimulating, and with all of these little squares, there is a very satisfying texture on this page, and they look so uniform and neat. These pages just scratch and itch in my brain, and I love it. For every second row, I'm using some tea stain paper for the squares, and the other squares I'm drawing on the page using my liner pen. To keep everything uniform, I'm using my alphabet stamp sets numbers with the brown distress ink pad. At the top of the spread, you can see my color key that I'll be using to fill in each square around the numbers. So for each physical book, I will be using my Țepeș Jelly Roll pen to fill in that square. For each audiobook, I'll use my copper Jelly Roll pen, and for my Kindle books, I'll be using my gold Jelly Roll pen. Now, all of these are obviously very similar colors, but I feel like it'll look quite nice because they're all kind of in the same color family. At the bottom of the page, I'm using some more tea stain paper. This paper is a different shade from the squares, and I think they complement each other quite nicely. And finally, I'm adding some vintage washi tape in the bottom right corner to finish off these pages. So now that I have a bookshelf to see what physical books I own and a playlist for my audiobooks, it's time for my reading log, where I can write down all of the books that I've read and give them my rating. This page is inspired by my reading log that I used in my 2024 bullet journal setup. I love it so much that I just had to do something similar. Starting off with a brown envelope that I'm making smaller so it fits in a travel journal. I just tried to match the pattern on the other side of the envelope so that it doesn't look like I just cut the envelope in half. For the library style card, I'm using some tea stained dot grid paper and gluing that to some black cardstock so that it holds its shape and has more structure, especially because I'll be removing this card every time I finish reading a book. For more space, I'm also adding the same dot grid paper on the other side of the card. So once I fill the one side, I could just flip it around and continue on the back. And if I do end up filling both sides, the envelope has enough space for me to make another card and put it in the envelope with this one. After gluing in the envelope, I also wanted to bring back more of the Harry Potter theme by adding some very appropriately themed journal papers with owls sitting on some old books, and it even has a few little envelopes. These papers are from one of our local stationery stores. I have asked them if they have any social media platforms where they advertise, but unfortunately they don't. But if you are recreating the spread, you really can use any papers that you have or even print some of your own. And finally, I'm using my alphabet stamps. I'm adding one of my favorite book-themed quotes. I have seen a few people use this next page in their reading journal setups, and I think this is a really cool page to include in your reading journal setup. It's the first sentence page. So for every book that you read, you write the first sentence of that book. In my opinion and from experience, the first sentence of a book can be very impactful and telling. It's more than just an introduction. It can really set the mood for what you're about to read. For example, the first sentence in Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone is Mr. and Mrs. Dursley of number 4 Privet Drive were proud to say that they were perfectly normal, thank you very much. And in The Book Thief by Marcus Zusak is, here's a small fact. You are going to die. You get the idea. For these pages, I wanted as much space as possible, so I've just added a few papers and some washi tapes from Notebook Therapy to the one side to add some texture to the pages. And I also kept the heading simple with my alphabet stamps. Keeping with the simplicity of the first sentence spread, my next spread will be in the same style. This is my favorite quotes page. I usually only write down about one quote per book, depending on how impactful the quote is, and some books I don't even end up quoting at all. I think it's a very personal thing. Some sentences in a story might impact one person deeply, but not mean a thing to someone else. And it doesn't all have to be all deep and moody. Sometimes I like to quote something really funny from a book that just made me laugh. Again, bringing back the Harry Potter theme with the Deathly Hallows symbol and a sticker of a book key that reminds me of the Daedalian keys from the Hogwarts Legacy game. The last pages of this reading journal setup before we get into my 2024 setup are going to be my genre tracker and my book bingo. These two spreads are very minimal and to the point. The genre tracker has a few common book genres that I enjoy, and how I'll be using it is once I read a book from one of the genres, then I will use my Jelly Roll pen and fill in one of the dot grid squares under that genre. The book bingo has also become a classic reading journal spread. For my first book bingo, I wanted to try and push myself to find new authors for all over the world. So the bingo challenges are to help me do that and kind of help me read books that I don't usually reach for, kind of put me out of my comfort zone with genres as well. So with prompts like a book by a South African and a book originally published in another language and more. The next section of my reading journal will specifically be for 2024. I decided on just a simple stamped year in the middle of the empty page to make a clear separation between the reading journal setup and my first yearly setup. My first spread in 2024's section is my book bracket. Some book brackets that I saw from other people have a lot more sections, but I wanted to keep it small because I don't read as many books, so I don't need as much space. If you're not familiar with the book bracket, this is where you write down your favorite books and then compare them to one another and pick your favorite one. So in the first section, I'll write 6 of my favorite books, then choose 3 from those, then pick my favorite 2 books, and then finally pick my favorite one for the year. For the final space, I'm using a craft paper tag to set it apart from the rest. In the bottom left corner is a little hint at my theme for 2024 with a ripped piece of a map and a quote that says, "Come with me where dreams are born and time is never planned." If you can guess the theme of my 2024 setup just by reading this quote, pause the video right now and go comment down below what the theme is, and we'll see how many of you guessed it right. The second spread for 2024 is my Days Read spread, where I mark each day that I read in 2024, like a reading tracker basically. For decoration, I'm using some of the scraps of journaling papers that I used earlier in my reading journal setup. Like I always say, no scrap goes unused. For the calendars, I'm using some tea stain dot grid paper. Using dot grid paper definitely makes it easier to write out the calendars because I don't have to do any measuring, and with 12 calendars to write out, it can be a bit tedious. I really like how the tea stain paper has some patterns and sections where the paper is lighter and other parts are darker. For the month header, I've used a stamp set that I got as a gift from a friend a few years ago, and I'm using it with my brown distress ink pad. Now, as you can see, I've drawn this little sketch of a girl standing on some books with a few dragons around her, and I just did not like the look of it. I don't know why, but I decided to cover it up with a book page. And using my black ink pot, I'm painting a silhouette of a very popular children's book and the actual theme of my 2024 reading journal. If you guessed it right earlier, congratulations. The theme of this year's setup is Peter Pan by J.M. Barrie. Like I said earlier, I am definitely a fantasy girly, so why not add a little fantasy book bingo for 2024 with some classic prompts like one-word title, The Fae, enemies to lovers, vampires, witches, royalty, and published in 2024 and published in 1996, the year I was born. And I of course needed to bring Tinkerbell in with a little doodle at the top. There have been a few classic books that I've read over the years, but so many more that I've wanted to read. But I end up forgetting about them because I haven't written them down somewhere. Because if I don't write something down, then it just fades away in my mind. So this section is for those books so I can remember them and tick them off as I read them. If I don't get to all of them, then I'll just carry over the ones that I haven't read to next year's setup, because there are many, many more that I haven't even included in this list. My best friend and I are going to be starting a little book club this year, so I wanted a place to write down some of the books we're going to read this year. She's very similar to me, where we both like to read, but we don't read hundreds of books a year. We're, however, going to try and read a book over 1 to 2 months and see how we get along. I'm sure we'll read some books faster than others. On the second page, I'm adding a full scrapbook style page in honor of the Peter Pan theme for 2024. And on the side, I'm using a washi tape by IEB Office in their vintage washi tape set. The affiliate link will be in the description down below, and for a 20% discount, use my code NAYSCraftyWorld123. On top of that, I'm using some journal papers that reminded me of old wooden ships and what looks like old navigation, geometry, and astronomy papers. For this page's quote, I'm again using my alphabet stamps with black Sakura brush pen as the ink. Instead of drawing directly on this page, I wanted the silhouette to stand out. So I printed this picture on some normal printer paper and used my craft blade to cut it out. I didn't include that process because I think this video is definitely long enough already. And then finally, I just darkened the printed paper with my liner pen to make it stand out a bit more. And finally, we've reached the last page in this year's reading journal setup. It's been a ride. Thank you so much if you're still here, and if you've just arrived because you've skipped through the video, thank you to you too. This spread was inspired by a similar page that I saw in a reading journal flip through by Savannah Scribbles, and this is the books to check out page. I always have a bunch of videos saved on Instagram or TikTok with book reviews or recommendations, but I rarely go back and go through those videos. So now I have a place to write down all of the books that I get recommended on social media or by my friends, so that I have a place to go when I'm looking for a good book to read. I'm using the same colors in this key as before for physical, Kindle and audiobooks. Here I can write the title and fill in the first square with the key color, so I know what kind of media I have it in or want to get it in. And then once I've gotten it, then I can check it off in the last square. Thanks so much for sticking around and watching me set up my first reading journal. Be sure to like the video and let me know what you think.